Hey guys, here we are in rehearsal. We're getting ready for an upcoming tour supporting our new album Human, which is out March 31st. And what I'd like to do today is do a breakdown of my guitar rig. But I've seen many guitar rigs online, you know, of my favorite guitar players and stuff, and they're usually pretty basic. You know, it's the guy giving the, you know, what amps he uses, what guitars, but you don't really get into too much detail. So my goal on this video is, you know, to get really in depth. This is probably going to be the most in-depth breakdown of a guitar rig ever. For the last month, I've had a very good friend of mine. His name is Lonnie Totman, guitar technician. He's been up in my shop for the last month, rebuilding my A rig. He's also built me a B rig, and what a B rig is a fly rig essentially. There's times where, you know, I might be on one side of the country one night, I got to be on the other side of the country or the other side of the planet. The next night, you logistically can't always fly your gear there. That's what the fly rig's for. You know, so I can be playing on my A rig, my B rig, which is a scaled down version of my A rig, is already sent off and already there for the next night. So Lonnie was cool enough to take some time and, you know, give a real extensive behind the scenes breakdown. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a breakdown of my thing, explain quickly what I'm using, but then Lonnie's going to take over and he's going to give you a complete in-depth breakdown of a guitar rig. So let's do this. So this rack here is my main amp rack. I mean, as you can see in here, I run, as I did before, I run the Diezel VH4s. I have a pair of them. I got two Marshall JMP1s. I have a pair of those as well, and an Angle power amp. Now, I've had a lot of people ask me in the past, you know, you have a lot of amps and things, what's going on? Is there a lot of channels you're using, like different, you know, sounds, or is it backups or what? It's pretty much that. It's, I have all my main sounds, my main amps and things I have a backup for. So no matter what, I can always, you know, get right to that and get right back to the party. You know, so as you see here, I run what's called a wet, dry, wet system, in which the Diezel is my main part of my sound. It runs up the center dry. And then the Marshall runs through the Eventide into the JMP1, which is my wet. The Eventide I use obviously for all my effects, the wet, the delays and everything else. And those run to a set of custom Krych cabs, which I run, again, the 4x12s with this. The outside set of speakers will be the wet for the Marshall side, which is all my splash. And so what I got going on here, other than the amps, is a Digitech 33B, in which I only use for it's inserted in the clean of the Diezel. I only use it there. I use it as a bit of a detune, and that's it. And of course, like I said, the other thing in here is the Eventide Eclipse, which is all my effects and stuff like that. So that's pretty much for this rack. And over here, you know, is my effects rack, in which it houses all my wireless. I have 4 sets of Sennheiser wireless in here, so you know, my guitar guy can, you know, have various packs on all my guitars. I use quite a few guitars, so he's got lots of channel options to switch me through the show. And then you know, a switching system for those, which you can see here. Then in here, all my effects are put into drawers. In this case here, they all run in here. They all run on. You can see here I got you know, some various things. A tube screamer for solos. I have this cool Caitlin bred Octave Mavis, which I use a lot. It's a bit of a secret weapon in my rig. You know, I use it for a lot of cool sounds. I have a super octave. I use a micro pog, small stone phaser. And this pedal is really cool. It's a Bixonic X Pandora. You know, it was really heavily endorsed with Billy Gibbons. You know, use that one a lot. Very cool pedal. I actually used it on the album for Painkiller. I also used it live for Painkiller as well as, you know, as well as a few other things. And a Fuzz Factory, which Zvex Fuzz Factory, which I use for like a real broken up, you know, smaller guitar sound. I use that for. So that's that drawer. And the next drawer, you can see here, what I got going on is just I've got a Hughes and Kettner Rotosphere. I use for like a simulated Leslie sound. I can speed up and slow down that just as you would a Leslie. Univibe, which is pretty much, you know, for a vibrato sort of an effect. And then that's pretty much that in my effects rack. You know, all of those go through what's an RJM loop selector. As you can see here, they're all labeled. Each one has an individual loop. So via my MIDI controller on my pedal board, which we'll get to, I can switch, as with my amp changing and everything, it'll also change, you know, whatever effect I might want in there on that particular channel. So that's pretty much it for these two racks. So we'll go to the pedal board now, I'll show you that, and we'll move from there, yeah. So this here is the pedal board for the A-Rig. As you can see, there's no effects on it like you might see on a lot of guys' pedal boards. As you saw, my effects are in the rack through the loop selector, so I don't need any of that on my board. Everything's programmed to individual channels on my MIDI controller. Like I said, I can switch to whatever I want, you know, coming in and out on this here. So really all there is a volume, which I use a pan, because I use an acoustic as well, a piezo, which I can, you know, go from electric to acoustic as well. There's a tuner, rotosphere, speed control. I can go fast, you know, fast, slow on that one. Crybaby wah. And then all this stuff here is, you know, pretty much switching and patching. You know, Lonnie's gonna get really in detail with all that and tell you about all that. A Mesa Boogie buffer in here. Other than that, I'm gonna leave this up to Lonnie. He's really gonna give you a really detailed breakdown of what's going on here and, you know, behind the rest of the rig. So, you know, live, you don't, the way we have, you know, we have a set built, you know, for our show, so you don't see any cabinets or anything like that. So what we've done is, you know, these ramps and everything you see, behind here is what it is where my cabinets are, you know. This is just for look, hides all the gear and stuff like that, but my cabinets, if you look under here, are actually buried under here. If you lift this up, it's what you don't see. So again, like I mentioned earlier, I use Krych custom cabs. They're custom made by Steve Krych, guy to London, Ontario. And what these are essentially is a 6x12, and I have two of them. Like I was saying, when I run the Diezel out of the center, these cabinets are a separate 4x12 and a 2x12. So the two inside 4x12s, that's Diezel. The outside 2s for my wet is you know, the JMP one, the wet side. So that's it for cabinets. These cabinets are badass. So this is my guitar rack, or guitar vault, as they call it. You know, the guitars sit in this case. It gets closed up and shipped like this. You know, there's straps that go on, so everything's safe. You know, during shipping, big cover goes on here. I use all Ibanez guitars, as I always have. You know, I mix it up from tour to tour. Every tour is a little different. I'll swap out a few guitars, try some different things. But there's some guitars that stay in here that, you know, I'll always play. That you know, some of my faves. Double neck definitely gets used. You know, this is an old 70s Ibanez double neck. Awesome sounding guitar, as well as you guys have probably all seen this before, is my old faithful Destroyer. It's kind of 70s model Ibanez. This is my favorite guitar by far, so I'll always be using this one. I've got some various other Destroyers in here. I'm trying out these reissue Destroyers from the early 80s, or you know, they're reissues of the early 80s Destroyers. Loving these, real cool, look great, play great. You know, and a few other things. Again, you know, I can never leave home without my custom shop baritones. You know, I play them in all the low tunings. They're tanks, they sound amazing. And you know, some various other things that I swap out. Like I said here, this time I got some ARTs, and I even brought this old SZ out of retirement, which I loved. As you can see, I played the hell out of this for the first couple years of touring, and I beat it up. I'm even down into the wood. I've dug into it so much. I thought I'd bring this out of retirement and play this again. I always love this guitar. It's a tank, stays in tune, sounds awesome. So that's pretty much it for the breakdown of the guitars.
Hey everyone, my name is Lonnie Totman. I've been a touring guitar tech for about the last 18 years or so, and building rigs at least that long, maybe longer. Today we're going to go into a lot of detail about Barry's rig, and I'll start off by talking about how our relationship came about. About 2006 or so, their production manager, Chris, who's a very good friend of mine, contacted me and wanted me to help clean up their stuff a little bit to make it a little more roadworthy and so on and so on. So the evolution of the gear has been really interesting for me as a builder, and what ended up happening is when Chris first called me and wanted me to sort things out, I'll be honest, like a lot of bands in their beginning stages, first record cycle, the gear was a total mess and it needed to be packaged in a way that made it roadworthy and reliable and sound good. So that was really the first criteria. The second time I built it, maybe 2 years later, Barry had told me that in the studio they had mixed a couple of heads together, blended some amp sounds, and wanted to incorporate that into his live rig. So his initial, the first version of the rig was really just one head in mono, which was the Diezel. Great sounding amp on its own, but Barry wanted to mix in the sound of more of a Marshall thing with to add in things that the Diezel was missing and vice versa. So what ended up happening is at that time we added the JMP1, and we had this old 80A power amp, and his rig was still in mono where we had 3 412s, and so the 2 412s on the outside was the Diezel and the Marshall section with 1 412 in the middle. And it sounded good, it blended well, and we at that point we expanded the loop switching stuff a little bit and went from there, and so they did the whole record cycle. The third time I built the gear was probably, oh, I don't even know, maybe 3 years ago now. And that was really interesting for me because when Barry first called me about it, he gave me a criteria that no other player had given me before, and he said, hey, I'm really happy with my gear, actually. I don't want you to change it drastically, just make it better. And no player said that to me before, and that's why Barry's one of my favorite guys to actually work for, because it helps push me and find new ways to do things and push the limits on things a bit. And so that was really neat. So what we did at that time was, okay, well, how do I make this better? So we did a couple of little changes, make things a little quieter. That's when we decided to go wet, dry, wet. I said, okay, one of the ways that we can utilize his effects better is he's using these Krych cabinets here, made by a young guy in Canada who's making excellent gear. And so what had happened is Barry had gotten rid of the 3 412s, and these are 2 612s. It's really a 412 cabinet and a 212 cabinet, all in one. And so what ended up happening was, so he was running the 212s in the center as if it were a 412 for the Marshall, and the 2 412s on the outside for the Diezel. So I suggested, why don't we flip them around and run a wet, dry, wet system. So for you guitar guys out there who know what that is, what we're doing is we have the 2 412 sections in the center on the Diezel, so you get that really big, direct, lots of attack, lots of clarity type sound. And then we're splitting off, we'll go into detail on that later, for the wet side, stereo left and right with the Marshall section. So that was now on the outside. So now you can get this wide imaging for delays or panning or detuning or whatever you program. And you still get that really direct sound, which is great for your front of house guy, because in an arena, especially when things can get washy, he now has that direct sound that he can pull up at whatever level he needs, and then he can get the effects on the left and right in the arena and pan it where he needs it to be to fit around, because it's not just about guitar, obviously. Even if it's a guitar band, you got to slot everything around that, drums, vocals, so on and so on. So wet, dry, wet rig really helps in that, and it helps a lot on stage too, for giving a player more of a studio quality kind of thing. So that's what we did on the third thing. And the other major thing we did on the third build of his rig was, that's when we brought Trace Davis from Voodoo Amps into the picture. We wanted to modify a JMP1 so we could refine it a little bit more and make it sound a little more natural, amp sounding. And he did a fantastic job with that. And so that's pretty much what we did the third time around. And then what ended up happening was, well, let's see, a couple months ago, I got a call again from Barry and for the new record cycle. And basically the criteria was the same thing. Well, let's take it another step further. Let's make it even better. And again, we weren't really swapping up much gear, so that was an interesting challenge. How do we take it even further? So what we did this time was the Angle 2 power amp here. We also got Trace Davis from Voodoo to modify that, and that's made it to a whole other level. It's a lot more natural amp sounding, because making a preamp power amp work together is a little bit harder than just a head. So that made a huge difference for us. And we also went to balanced audio for his loom, going long runs out to his pedal board, which we'll go into detail a little further in the video on that. And a couple other things we were doing, just cleaning things up, like making the pedal board a little more ergonomic than it was before, making it a little easier for patching for his tech and so on. And so we'll go into some of those details, and that was the criteria going into it. So it's been a fun challenge, actually. All right, a couple weeks ago, maybe, Barry's wife was the one who suggested doing this video, and while Barry and I were hanging out while I was working on his gear, we were talking about when we were teenagers and really excited about gear. And back then, of course, it was mostly guitar magazines, you know, doing rig rundowns, and that was always so exciting. You're trying to learn, oh, what's this guy using and whatnot. But it didn't get into a lot of detail, obviously. And in recent years, you've seen a lot of guys doing rig rundown stuff on the internet, which is cool. That stuff's always a lot of fun, but we're talking about how we always felt like we wanted more, a little more detail of what was going on under the hood. And so we were throwing around some ideas, and that's how this all came about. So what we're going to talk about, first of all, is when you're just physically putting the gear together, not the patching and the grounding and all that stuff, just physically attaching things. And believe it or not, it takes me about the better part of a day to actually just populate everything, to attach everything to the board, put it in the rack. And you might think, well, wow, why would that take so long? Well, you got to remember that this stuff is traveling around the world, and it takes more of a beating than people realize, shaking around the tractor trailers and planes, local hands taking it on and off trucks, and so on and so on. So it's got to survive. And so there's different ways of going about that. One of the main things that you don't want to have happening with your pedals especially is you don't want anything rocking side to side. That's why I don't use, say, regular Velcro, because it will move. And what happens is when you have things moving, it puts stress on your cable. So when things start going down, typically, it's not something, 9.5 times out of 10, it's not something really major, like an amp frying or whatever. It's a cable or an end or a battery clip and that sort of thing. So key thing is get everything nice and solid. You don't want it moving. Plus there's some preparation stuff for grounding that takes a lot of time. And so if you're just slapping your stuff in your rig, you're not doing it right. You got to take your time, get things prepared properly. So that's where it starts. And again, the reason is to survive on the road. Now, Barry's criteria is number one, he wants the gear to work every day. Yeah, that's not shouldn't be a surprise. Number two, he wants it to sound really good. And it has a very, really big, good sounding rock tone. So we do a couple of tricks, as you'll see, to maximize that. But as a touring tech, my criteria starts with that and goes beyond that. So number one is, what do we do to make it work? So when we connect everything, you'll see that I have a lot of anchors and zip ties and so on and so on. And it's kind of a pain, to be honest with you. It's very time consuming, and it takes a while to do. However, by locking everything down so it's not moving, it keeps it stable, so it's solid and it's going to work all the time. And it's a system that works for me and for the guys that I build for. So that's the first thing, is make sure everything's nice and solid. The next thing is you want to package it in a way that makes it very quick to set up and tear down for the technician, because on your load in, but especially the load out, it's, time is money, labor costs and whatnot. So you want to get everything quick and efficient and make it really simple. So when we get to the back of the rig, you'll see what I'm talking about, but a little bit going on here. Basically, this is a patch box. So the looms come in and everything is connected to here. So everything is, power's over here. All the audio and control stuff is over here. So it's nice and simple. Everything's color coded. So red goes to red. It's very simple. But if there's ever any question, I label it in a way that it tells you exactly where it's going to or coming from, so you can tell what the signal chain is. And all these are locking connectors. We put handles on here. So the reason for that is if you got a, your singer stomping around doing his thing, if he happens to accidentally step on here, the connectors are going to survive and it's not going to take the rig down. So you got to think like that too. How's this stuff going to survive? Well, it's in battle, And so we got the same kind of things going on in the rack, although it's not going to get stepped on typically. There's certain ways that you do things, and you'll see when we get back there. But so we'll get into signal flow a little bit here. Basically, we've got a guitar cable coming in here, which is really just for backup. And his wireless stuff is coming into here. Now, the wireless, you've got 4 receivers going to a switcher for 4 outs. That signal now gets converted into a balanced signal. Now, one of the things that guitar players, I'll be honest with you, and techs have got to get out of the Stone Age is on the looms running from the long lines from your pedal board back to your rig. balanced audio has been around for a long time, and it just hasn't really been applied that much in a live guitar rig, and it's just time to start doing that, guys. It solves lots of problem with signal loss, obviously, but mostly noise rejection, because instead of just having a hot and audio on your shield, you have a positive and negative audio line, so you're getting noise cancellation, and there's no audio on your shield. So whatever it's picking up is not dumping into your amplifier. So this stuff, we're only just starting to see commercial versions of that. The one I wanted to use was a Mesa prototype that my buddy Marino from Axess Electronics designed. It's going to be a killer piece of gear, but it's not available at this time. I've used it once in a rig, and it's fantastic. So we ended up going with a Radial, which is a really great choice as well. And so what's happening is, in the back of the rack, as you'll see, from the output of the switcher, it goes into a balanced send. That comes into here, and it receives the balanced audio, converts it to unbalanced, and then goes back into the rest of the rig. Now, what happens here is we can have a backup cable patched in case for whatever reason a wireless goes down, which really doesn't happen very often if you get everything set up right. We have a switch here, so you can just select between cable in or wireless in. Then the next thing we do is we go into a buffer here. Now this is a prototype. It's not on the market yet, but it will be soon. It's made by Mesa, and again, it's Mario from Axess Electronics, who's very good friend for a long time, and he's one of the best guys in the field out there doing this stuff. Now, what a buffer does, without getting too much into the technical side of things, it couples a high impedance source to a low impedance load. One of the perceptions that people have is that the best guitar tone you're going to get is a guitar cable amplifier, and I hate to tell you this, guys, but that's just not true. Because you have an impedance mismatch. Guitars have either like a Strat with a 250K pot, or a Les Paul, for example, with a 500K pot. Well, all amplifiers, almost all amplifiers, have a 1 meg input impedance. That really comes from, when you look at the history from old radio manuals, when RCA put tubes out on the market, they needed a reason for people to buy them, making radios and amplifiers and whatnot. And they had a 1 meg input impedance, so that's really been copied ever since the 30s. And so ever since the first electric guitar, it was never impedance matched with the first amplifier. So that's been going on to this day. So basically what this does is it solves that issue. Not all buffers are the same, and you don't want to use the same type of buffer in different applications. This one is specifically designed really to couple your guitar with the rest of your rig. I can't go in, because it's not on the market yet, I can't go into too much detail of what's going on under the hood, but it makes it extremely reactive. It gives your complex rig a more organic feel. So that's why that's on there. Then what we're doing is we're running to the tuner, it's just volume pedal, to his wah. Then we're going to a balanced send, back to the patch box, and back to his rack. The other side of the volume pedal is the Ernie Ball stereo switching volume pedal. So he hits this switch. Basically what's going on here is he has a piezo pickup in one of his electric guitars that's plugged in here, and so he can pan between the acoustic sound or the electric sound, obviously. So that's why the DI is here. Now, even things like the output of the DI, yeah, I could unplug that, and our monitor guy and audio guys can plug in there. We're not doing that. I have that, so the piezo in goes here, the DI out to the PA system goes here. One of the reasons why people might say, hey, well, that's an extra connection, it could cause problems. That's not true. If your stuff is well made and it's properly maintained, you're not going to have those problems. But what this allows me is, say, for example, the singer does happen to step on this and break it, because it can happen. I now have a way out. I can unplug this, I can take the DI line, plug it in there, so it's another form of backup. So that's partly why we're doing some patchbox stuff. It's not just about convenience. It also gives us a way out for potential problems. Same thing with the locking power here, same idea. And just to give you an idea of what's connected to this, I'll just go grab something over here. When you bundle a bunch, you don't want to run obviously, as you guys out there who set up your stuff in your own gigs and whatnot, you obviously don't want to run a bunch of individual lines. It's not very efficient, and it's kind of messy looking on stage. And in arena shows, you want everything kind of clean looking. And so whenever you bundle a bunch of cables together, we refer to it as a loom. Now, it's got to be done in a way that's really solid, really clean. You don't want it coming apart on you. You don't want people, you know, tripping on it or anything, blah, blah, blah. So it's got to be quick to set up though, and efficient to troubleshoot if you do have a problem. So basically it's really simple. Red to red. Got to label where it's going to or where it's coming from. Everything patches in accordingly. So you'll see that every single line, it's got a very clear color, very clear description of what it's doing. Same thing with the power down here. Now, one of the things we do, for example, this is a nitric power con connector. We have carabiners, nice and fast. This way, it's strain relief. So if by chance, again, you know, Barry or a singer happens to walk by, hit that, it's not going to come undone. Might move the pedal board a couple inches, but it's going to continue working. The show's going to go on. So that's the idea here. We've got the same thing happening over here on this side. We clip it on here. And again, all that stuff plugs into there. So that's a really simple, efficient way to make stuff a little more sturdy to handle the live show. And that's just to bungee, wrap it up, put it in a case, nice and neat on the loadout. That way things don't get twisted up and get damaged. Okay, that's about it really for Barry's main rig pedal board. All right, guys. What we've done here, this is basically Barry's head rack. Now, in the third incarnation of his rig, a couple pieces were over here in his effects rack, and to me that wasn't very efficient. We want all the amp related stuff in one place. It keeps less stuff crossing back and forth in terms of audio and MIDI and so on, and it just makes it a neater, tighter package. So one of the things I do is anything that's critical for a gain structure setting, because you don't want to be overloading things, you don't want it to be anemic and driving really weak, so you got to find that optimal setting. So that's called gain structure. Anything relating to ground, like some devices, for example, there's nothing here on the front, it's on the back, but some devices will have a switch for whether it grounds earth ground or audio ground, sorry, to the chassis. So it's critical which position that's set in. So anything that's critical to the rig working the way it's supposed to be, gain structure and ground, I always label with a yellow P-Touch label. And it's very efficient for the tech to be able to look, make sure everything's right, doing it quickly. And it's helped me in situations where I built a rig for guys on the road, gives me a call someday, hey, I have this bad hum in a rig, and I always say, check your yellow label settings. And it's like, oh, sorry man, I hit that one by accident, problem solved, everybody's happy. So that's why I do that. Makes it fast. Now, we also obviously label basic amp settings. Everybody does that, but it's just a starting point, because when every venue is slightly different, so you're going to tweak it slightly from there. I got a couple of notes here. The Marshall being an older unit, some of the MIDI mapping that we got going on is a little not typical, actually. So just some simple notes there to make it easier for the tech in case anything needs to change. The information's there, because that's not in the manual, believe it or not. So that's really it for the front of the amp rack. Again, Barry already explained to you we have some backup stuff. All that's being fed audio. We'll go into that in the back. Okay, over here in the effects rack, one of the things I've been doing for quite a few years now is I color code each receiver and each switch. Also on the transmitter pack on the guitar, I put the same color. So you know, we're human, sometimes we forget to hit a switch. So I hand Barry guitar, he goes out the middle of the stage, guitar's not working, turns around, looks back at me, and I'm like, oh, I can see from halfway out there that he's on the yellow. And I'm like, oh, I forgot to hit that one. It happens, but this way it makes it really quick, not a lot of thought, really simple, the guy's up and running. So that's the idea there. As Barry explained to you with the pedals, we have an RJM effect gizmo. All the pedals are on all the time. We're just turning, it's a relay switcher, so we're just turning the loops on and off via MIDI. So you can do it in any combination, store it, send it the appropriate program. One of the things I do here with this switcher, and any switcher really, is I label what's in each loop. So the great thing is when I'm doing a changeover on a show, you have a very short amount of time. And so I need to know everything's going to work. And so I can very quickly just turn each one on and off, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. So that's a really handy feature on this particular switcher. The pedals in here are some cool choices, you know, stuff that you can, you know, readily available, but some really cool choices Barry's got going on here, like various fuzzes and whatnot. You'll see a couple of things here. Now, the one thing that's interesting, we just added to this rack, we call it the don't ask pedal because we're basically not going to tell you. But what it does in short is it's really to work with the fuzzes. As some of you guys know out there, that a lot of fuzzes do not like to have buffers in front of them. There really hasn't been a commercial product to solve that problem at all. And I've been bugging my good buddy Mario from Mesa and Axess for I don't even know how long now, maybe 15 years or more, to solve this issue. And he's a genius, and he finally solved it. And so we got that in there to make the fuzzes sound correct, because certain fuzz pedals just do not jive with all this gear, so that solves that problem. And the other thing going on here, really, we've got a couple of drawers just from spare stuff, some spare tubes, some spare power adapters, odds and ends to help survive the road. Okay, so this is the back of Barry's amplifier rack. Now, one of the things I've learned from experience is that every single connection there is, I don't care if it's low voltage, high voltage, speaker, audio, MIDI, whatever, has a very clear, simple label. For example, if this had no labels on it and I yanked it out, it'd be a nightmare to trace it to figure out where it's going. So this way it makes it very brain dead simple. Anybody can understand it. So it's a reliable system for when you do have to troubleshoot something. So that's a very important thing that I think everybody should be doing on their rigs. As you can see, everything is fairly neat. It's all locked down really solid. One of the things that's important to me as a rig builder is I don't want a whole bunch of stuff in the middle. I see lots of rigs, unfortunately, that have all this cabling here. It makes it very difficult to work in. So if you do have an issue or you need to change something, it's very simple for me to get in here. Got lots of space. So that's one of the approaches I take. Now, the patch, every rack has got a patch panel, kind of like the patch boxes on the pedal board that we saw earlier. The head rack here basically have speaker outs to go from the Engel power amp, speaker outs from the Diezel come from the heads. We're gonna put a little patch box in here later. I gotta still build that because we're still in the process. Hey, look, a lone zip tie there. The idea of, again, I gotta build these patch boxes here for the speakers. So it gives me a locking, very solid connection for the speaker line. And if he needs to go to his backup head, his tech's just got to jump that down there. So it's nice and simple. You don't have to reach in for things. Very clear where it goes. Okay, what do we got going on under the hood here? A lot of people might think who are new to this stuff, you just, you know, what's the big deal, right? You just plug in all the power, you plug in all the audio, and away you go. Well, anybody who has an experience with this knows that that's very far from the truth. You're going to get a hell of a lot of noise, a lot of 60 cycle hum. It's very loud. It's not acceptable. So there's certain things that you do. Now, one of the things, I'm not going to get into all the details in this, but believe it or not one single piece of gear in all of this rig or Barry's fly rig, which we're going to see in a few minutes here, has any AC power lifted, any earth ground lifted. Not one thing. So everything has a very solid ground. That's extremely important. If you start lifting earth grounds, you know, breaking your prongs in your plug, lifting them, not only is it unsafe in terms of an amplifier, because the part of the circuit has about 450 volts DC, and I've been shocked with that. Believe me, it hurts. But electricity takes the least path of resistance to ground. So if I'm lifting the AC power on a head and something by chance happens to short inside the head, it's going to look for a ground to go to, and it's going to go the other way, and that'll be the guitar player. And we don't want that happening. Didn't work out so good for Tommy Bolin. So no ground is lifted whatsoever. So that's criteria number one. Now, one of the problems that we had with what you will encounter when you mix more than one amplifier is phasing issues. Now, what phasing is what a lot of guys don't realize is your little preamp tubes in your heads are actually two tubes in one. So when you run through one half of that tube, that's one gain stage, and it actually flips your signal 180 degrees. So the positive of the waveform now becomes the negative of the waveform. So you come in and it flips 180 degrees. That's called flipping phase. Now, when you have two amplifiers doing that, they don't always do that together in synchron. They don't synchronize. So we got to solve that issue, because what happens is you start getting, when you have one amp, what that really means in terms of the amplifiers is when Barry hits the guitar, one cabinet the speakers will move forward, and the other cabinet the speakers will move backwards. That causes frequency cancellation. So what will happen is the guitar starts disappearing. So especially in in-ears, all of a sudden, so you have a nice big clean sound or something, you go to this big heavy dirty sound, it's supposed to be crushing, but you literally can barely hear it, it just disappears. That's because it's out of phase. So we got to take that one of the amplifiers and flip it back. Now the problem is when you have a rig like this, where you have a lot of you have several different presets going on. So we have 4 channels on the Diezel, and we have X number of presets on the JMP1. There's not a lot, maybe 10, something like that. So it made sense for us to solve the phasing issue in the Marshall. So what we did right here, I don't know if you can see this, but I made these phase reverse boxes. And so what happens is we patch that into the loop of the Marshall. So, for example, channel 4 on the Diezel is out of phase when we're on the overdrive setting on the Marshall. So that gets patched in the effects loop. So what we do in the programming stage is we engage the effects loop, crank that wide open, and that will, going through the phase reverse box, it flips the phase. So now everything's in phase. It sounds correct. It sounds big again. And that allows it to be programmable. So I got one for the main preamp, another one for the backup preamp. So that's a really big deal when you're mixing 2 amplifiers. Phasing is huge. It frankly doesn't work right at all when it's out of phase. Okay, what else we got going on here? So basically, from the effects rack, you have the audio coming in, and we have the MIDI coming in from that ultimately originates with a MIDI controller. Controls the RGM loop switcher in the effects rack, and it comes over here to send program change messages to the 2 Diezels for channel switching, to the Marshall preamps to change programs, and for the Eventide to change programs. So we got to split all that. That's not an easy thing to do. There's a certain way you have to go about that. So basically we're running in here, going all the way down, and we're hitting an Axess Electronics BS2 buffer. Now, this buffer, again, as I said earlier, buffers, they couple a high impedance source to a low impedance load. Now, in this particular case, we're specifically using a buffer to split. So it's a totally different kind of buffer than what we have going on the input of the rig. That buffer, again, is right off of the guitar. This one's right before the amplifier. So now you have the correct impedance constant, no matter what he's turning on and off, you have the same impedance hitting the input of all the amplifiers, and that's really important to having consistency in your sound. Now, also because we're splitting, you can't just, as guys with experience know, you can't just make Y cables and split everything, because it starts dividing your impedance, and you start getting a lot of loading, and it just messes everything up. So you can't do that. So that's what we're doing here. One is splitting to the main Diezel. The other one's splitting to the backup Diezel. Now this one is splitting to both Marshalls. Now, even though it's buffered out, in order to make everything quiet, I'm running through some. I'm splitting a Y off of the Axess buffer, running through some ISO transformers here to feed the Marshalls. That way, all 4 amplifiers are being fed a signal constantly. So if by chance something went down, it's a minimal amount of moves to get it up and running. For example, all I got to do is unplug the output of the Marshall, the main Marshall, to the backup Marshall. It's clearly labeled which one's main, which one's backup. And speaking of labeling, another thing we do is we label when things were retube last, because you get out on the road for on and off for a year, maybe it's time to start changing tubes, and you're like, hey, when did we last do that, guys? Well, you don't have to guess. It's very clear here. Okay, so that's how we're splitting to the input of all the amplifiers. Now, again, as I said earlier, we're running wet, dry, wet. So The output of the Diezel at this point just goes right to the speaker cabs. As Barry said earlier in the introduction, the IPS-33B is in the insert on channel 1 only for a detune core sound, because Barry prefers a more stable sounding chorus without the wobble. It's just a few cents up, a few cents down to give it a little bit of width, a little bit of character. So that's all we really got going on with the Diezel. We got the pedals in front, we got the detune on the clean channel, that's it. So it's very direct, very simple. Now, the Marshall, what we got going on there is on the output of the preamp, we're running to the Eventide Eclipse for time-based stuff mostly, some delays and reverb, and we're going to do a little programming for a bit of a detuning thing there as well, and we're going to do that tomorrow, I think. And that's really cool because, again, if you have delays on your main sound, it can get kind of washy sometimes, especially in a rock band where you got a lot going on, a lot of volume, and you're in an arena where you got a lot of things bouncing around. So we got the delays completely separate from that main guitar sound. So that's being done in the Marshall section between the preamp and power amp. Out of the power amp straight out to the cab. So that's pretty much all that's going on here. Again, any pertinent ground settings, any gain structure settings, all labeled in yellow. So it's very clear, because sometimes you got to poke around in here looking at something, you might accidentally hit it, something's not right that day. You're like, oh, I accidentally hit that. It's very clear, makes it easy for anyone. Oh, another thing I do on every rack I build, somewhere I'm trying to find a place to put a power bar. The reason for that is you don't always have enough available power. So you want to charge something or whatever, it's all right there. Key thing though, when you're laying out a rig, you want all your audio stuff on the right, because most audio connections are on the right side. You want all your 120 volt power stuff on the left, because AC power has a fairly large hum field, even just down the cable. So you can prove that easily. Just take your input guitar cable, run it by your audio, or sorry, your AC power. You will hear a bit of a hum increase. So keep it away. That's, again, partly why I keep the center clean. It's not just for neatness. I typically put my MIDI stuff, MIDI doesn't really matter if it's grounded correctly, which I see a lot of guys make a mistake with that. There is a spec for how to ground MIDI, and so sometimes it's on the right, sometimes it's on the left, depends on the gear, on the physical layout of the gear. Any low voltage stuff I put on the left, and I run that separately, physically separate from the high voltage stuff. Not for any electronic reason, it's really for neatness. And if I do have to say, change something, if say the player wants to add a different pedal or device or whatever, I don't have to start undoing all these other unrelated sections. I can just go to the section I need to change. Makes it a lot easier. That's about it in the head rack. Okay, this is the back of Barry's effects rack. As you can see, it's not completed. We got a couple more days work left, so you'll see it in action in a rehearsal here soon. So all I really got left to do here now, so this is a sliding tray shells with the pedals on, so we'll just move them forward. You can see that all the lines are joined together and, for the audio. We've got the power over here. Again, audio on the right, power on the left. You have to figure out a way, and you really figure it out from experimenting experience, figure out a way that the shelf can come in and out without the cables binding up on everything and hitting the knobs and changing settings or whatever. So that takes a little bit to figure out. All right, so like I said, this is not complete yet, so I still got to label the patch panel properly, changing a few things up here. I still have to finish doing a little wiring here. So we got a couple days left to do that. But basically what's going on here is this section is coming, this is for the wireless antenna in for his wireless transmitters. This section here is for the pedal board. We saw the patch box earlier, the loom running down. Well, it connects here. Again, we strain relief it to one of the handles here, so it's not gonna just, you don't ever want your cabling just hanging off. It puts too much strain, and that's when things start breaking, things stop working. So again, it's strain relief, as we saw earlier, with a carabiner to a handle. Then we have a nice clean loop coming up here. Everything's color coded, really simple to patch. Clear labels where things are going. Again, I'm gonna change this up. This was done probably 4 years ago or so. I've changed the way I've been doing a couple of things, make it a little simpler for the techs operating it. Okay, and this section here, just a couple of lines we saw earlier on the head rack, just jumping over to the head rack. So again, it's strain relieved. Away we go. Okay, so you got your guitar signal coming in, sorry, out of the wireless. You get your wireless running into the 4 here, running into the switcher. It goes down to the balanced send. So that converts it over to balanced, comes out here, out to the pedal board, goes through everything we described earlier on the pedal board. then it converts after the pedal, running through the various unbalanced pedals, converts it back to balanced, sends it back into here. Then it routes down to here for a balanced receive. Then it runs into the input of the switcher. All of this is basically just ins and outs, going to the pedals that are on. Again, as I said earlier, we turn the relays on and off remotely. Now, the output of the switcher now basically runs up here, comes over to here, and runs over to the head rack. From the pedal board receive, we have the Rotosphere. Barry pointed that out earlier. He has a slow fast control for his Rotosphere, kind of like a Leslie thing. That's where that is. And then MIDI in from the RJM MIDI controller to control the RJM switcher. MIDI coming out to control the heads and whatnot. We talked about that earlier. This is a Neutrik PowerCon connector. That's where my 120 volts are coming out, feeding the pedal board. Now, you gotta be careful how you run that, because I have audio here, so I want to run it in a way that I'm going to try to keep things apart a little bit. So you don't want 120 volts laying right against your audio cable. All the patch panel stuff, I got it up. It's nice and tight and neat up here. I don't want anything hanging down. So if I do have to get in here, I'm not catching on anything, which is going to break things. But I also have it long enough that if I do have to fix something or change something, I can just pull the panel off, hangs down here, and I can get inside it and work on it. So you got to think down. You got to think down the road a little bit. What if I have to fix something? When the player inevitably wants to change something? How do I make it easy to do? So that's what's going on there. Now, another simple thing I do is you'll notice here on these couple of connectors, it has a red shroud on it. The other one's got a green. The reason why I do that is it tells me at a quick glance, where's the input to this rig? Where's the output? So I got all these connections going on, but I can just go in, out. So if I have to do some kind of quick patching thing or whatever, I know exactly what's going on just by looking at it. Again, everything's got a clear label, exactly where it is. The back of my wirelesses, I have them labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. I showed you earlier on the color coding. This way I can look and I know exactly which wireless it is if I'm behind it. I get extra power on here. What else can we show you here? The main thing is when you have this much cabling going on, it's really important to keep it neat as you can, because again, it's shaking around a lot when it's on the road. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how much abuse this stuff takes on the road. It's moving, it's shaking, it's sometimes unfortunately being knocked over. And you got to make it solid so nothing's going to happen, because you only have so much time to make things happen for a show. And so you want to make it survivable, and you want to make it laid out in a way that it's easy to solve problems, because problems do come up. And again, you want it locked down, like I said, nice and tight, nice and neat, clearly labeled. That's about it, really. So we went through the pedal board, the head rack, the effects rack, looms. There's a loom that goes from the pedal board to the effects rack, from the effects rack jumping over to the head rack. You got a speaker loom going from the head rack to the speaker cabinets. Everything is clearly labeled, clearly color coded, nice and fast for the techs. And of course we have spare cables for the piezo in and the guitar in, and we've made up some extra lines for everything. So spare XLR MIDI lines, a regular spare MIDI line, spare, because the Rotosphere is a TRS cable, tip ring sleeves, so we have a spare of that, spare power cables, everything you can need, keep it up and running. So Barry has peace of mind, because that's the number one thing for a guitar tech. Your goal is to instill confidence in the guitar player. You want him to be up there, smiling, having a good time. You don't want him worrying about, is my gear gonna work every night? That's the last thing you want a player thinking about. And problems do happen, so most guys are pretty reasonable. You know, if something out of the blue happens, if you know what you're doing, you can solve it quickly. Half the time you can solve things where he doesn't even know it's happening. So you want to instill confidence in the player so he can have a good time up there doing what he does. So he can do what he does for you guys. All right, thanks. Okay guys, here we have what we call a fly rig. Now, sometimes in the music industry, you have situations where you're not driving tractor trailers and buses to a gig. You have to fly somewhere, be it across the country, across the planet, whatever. Fly rigs are typically a lot smaller than your main rig, and the reasons for that are cargo costs sometimes is increasing every day. It's very expensive. And sometimes there's just not enough time to get your main stuff from one place to the next. So this allows us to have gear in one place and gear in another place. You can still get there and do the shows on time. Now, when Barry contacted me about doing a fly rig for them, I knew a typical fly rig wasn't going to work for him, because I understand very clearly what Barry likes and wants, and the importance for a really good guitar sound in 3 Days Grace. So typically a fly rig for most people is really just a pedal board with a handful of pedals on it, typically without MIDI switching, and you're running into rental amplifiers. Typically you can find from a rental company wherever in the world. Maybe you can find there's certain heads you can get, standard type stuff, but I knew that the Diezel was very important to Barry, and you're not going to find that in a rental situation. So we had to do a slightly bigger fly rig, but try to keep it within the weight limitations and size limitations of throwing it on a plane. Now, because you can't always cargo stuff, sometimes you got to check things in. So the long and short of it is the details on the fly rig are very similar to Barry's main rig in terms of, you know, how things are physically laid out in terms of grounding or patching or labeling and all that. It's all kind of the same, so there's no use going through that again. The key differences on the fly rig, as you can see, this is easily about a third the size of Barry's main rig, yet he still has everything he needs. So I had to find a way. I knew that just a pedal board with half a dozen stomp pedals on it into some kind of rental head was just not going to work for the 3 Days guys. Nobody was going to be happy with that. So I had to kind of push the limits a little bit of what I could get away with, even though I know their production manager's not happy about it, right, Chris? He's cool. Yeah, sometimes you got to smooth it out, right? Okay, so anyway, the main difference here, though, is instead of having a separate MIDI controller and a rack audio loop switcher like in the main rig, it's all being done on the pedal board. Now, there have been several companies in recent years that come out with a MIDI controller and audio switcher all in one, which works really fantastic for this kind of situation. So again, we got the same kind of thing: patch box, buffer, tuner, volume, wah, blah, blah, blah. We got DI for acoustic, balanced in and outs, all that stuff. Power supplies, patch box for the power. The main difference is instead of the pedals in the rack, it's on here. Now that does make for a slightly larger pedal board compared to the main pedal board, obviously, but it greatly reduces the size of the rack because you're looking at a couple of spaces for your tray, which we have anyway, but switcher, so on and so on. It was just going to get too big and too heavy. So we pushed the limits of the pedal board for weight and size, that it fits the criteria we need and fits for everybody involved, for the airline, for production manager, for Barry, for the band. So that it's just a condensed version. Now in the rack, same kind of thing going on his wet side. So I got to back up one step. Basically, blending two amplifiers is, as we discussed in the main rig, is very important to Barry to get the sound that he wants. And running wet, dry, wet has become something that he's very accustomed to and wants to have that in every situation. So typically, you're not going to go to that extent in a fly rig system. It's just pedal board into a head and mono, go. And again, that wasn't going to work for this. So this was a unique criteria to figure out how to get Barry what he wants to make him comfortable and fit all the other criteria for weight and size and whatnot. So basically, it's all the same. We have, again, another Marshall JMP1 preamp modded by Trace Davis at Voodoo Amps. Sounds great, as we said earlier. Another angle power amp. What we ended up doing here is a little bit different. As we said earlier, on the wet side of things, we have the Eventide Eclipse on the main rack. So I had to figure out a way. Okay, obviously we're not going to take up another rack space. It's too big. It's unnecessary in a fly rig. So we have the excellent sounding Strymon Timeline delay, and that's running on the output of the Marshall into the angle power amp for his outside left-right stereo. Again, the Diezel's in the center. So we're using rental cabinets in this case. So we're running 3 412s, because shipping around on a fly date, shipping around 412s is unnecessary weight. You can get them in lots of different places, and they're not always what the Krych cabinets are doing that we went through earlier. But you know, there are certain acceptable compromises on a fly date. So we're running 3 412s, be them Marshall or Boogie or whatever we can get a hold of. Sometimes you got to go with what's available in that region. So we have 1 412 in the center on the Diezel. Same idea is on the white dry main rig, and then we have 2 412s left right for the Marshall side. So again, we got the delays on the outside. Now obviously you're not going to, in a fly rig, you're not going to throw something like the Digitech IPS 33B rack mount into a rack. It's just going to make it too big, too heavy. So Digitech came out with this new pedal called Lux, and it's basically a detuned pedal. So it kind of does, for the most part, it does what the 33B does in a pedal. So that's in the insert on channel number 1 on the Diezel. So really, we pretty much have everything's got Barry's got going on in the main rig in a much smaller package. We had to make some changes. There's no rack mount power supply. I had to do that all in the back to save size. We only have 2 wireless units instead of 4. Instead of a rack mount wireless switcher, my buddy Ike Zimbel at Zimbel Audio in Toronto just built me a very simple, passive, balanced in and out switcher. Again, everything's color coded, nice and simple. Everything's clearly labeled for the looms, make it nice and easy for the tech. So that's pretty much what's going on. We'll look at the back now. Okay, so this is the back of Barry's condensed fly rig. Again, just like in the main rig, everything is color coded, pertinent information for labeling. A couple extra things because it's a fly rig. For example, on the head and the patch box for the speaker lines, for the angle power amp, I have it just a simple reminder label: check ohmage with rental cabs, because if you are going with Marshalls or you're going with Boogies or whatever, the ohmage is not all the same. You want to get that right. So you're not going to necessarily follow the color coding that you have for your main rig. So simple reminder, make sure it's right so everything works properly. Other little things we put labels on, again, as we said earlier, when it was retubed, a gentleman in Toronto named Chris Church changed out the filter caps for us and retubed it. And we have simple information like this is biased at minus 27 milliamps. So I know exactly where it's biased at. I can call them up, get the exact same tubes, put them in there, or I can change the bias myself. So again, simple little things like that help me and the tech for maintenance. Okay, so down here, we got the same idea as in Barry's main rig. So we have several different looms coming in and out of here. So basically, it starts at the pedal board, like we described earlier. So this section here is pedal board loom coming in. This here jumps up to the wireless switcher. This is meant for tech to set it wherever he wants, up to there. And this here is what jumps up to the Diezel head for the center return for the Lux pedal, MIDI control of the head, audio into the head, that sort of thing. Wireless antenna in. This is power up to the head. Again, power up to the pedal board, so on and so on. Nice and simple. I have another Axess Electronics BS2 buffer splitter to split to the Diezel and to split to the Marshall side of the rig. Again, I got a balanced receive here. You'll notice in this particular one, it doesn't have a balanced transmit. That's because in the wireless units, it's actually balanced out. So I'm utilizing, in this case, again, to save gear, save weight, save size, I'm just using a balance out on the wireless, which is why I have a balanced switcher. And that's what's sending out to the pedal board balance. This is receiving balance. We've got a little box back in here, just like in the main rig, to do phase reverse, to solve that issue with the Marshall with the Diezel. And this is a simple patch box, locking connectors just for the cabinets. Again, a reminder, check the ohmage on the cabinets. And again, the reason why patch box is locking, it's a little more solid. Plus, the tech doesn't have to reach inside. Like, where does this plug in? You start hitting things, you start having problems. We've got a couple little grounding tricks going on here to make it quiet. Everything is properly impedance matched, clearly labeled, nice and solid, so everybody can have a good gig. Again, in keeping with the idea that we're all guitar geeks and we want to see a little more detail, what's going on under the hood, part of the reality in doing fly dates is you're not flying backup gear. It's just not the reality. Again, on Barry's main touring stuff, got backup heads, backup preamps, obviously lots of backup guitars. You just can't always be flying that around. So that's when the rental gear comes into place. Now again, as I said earlier, in order to get Barry what he wanted, we had to have his core sound there, the Diezel, the Marshall, so on and so on. So we got that, but we're not carrying extras of that. So we're going to be dealing with some rental gear. Now, you got to have it so it's consistent. So in other words, we're always trying to get the same rental head. In this particular case, where we're getting Mesa Boogie dual rectifiers. Now, there are for those in the know of that, there are 2-channel rectifiers, there are 3-channel rectifiers. But with a little bit of research, we realized that they don't all have the same switching control. Some of the older versions have 2 jacks on the 3-channel for switching control. Some have 2 jacks, some have 3 jacks. And so that's not something you can specify when you when you order that from a rental company. So that can cause a lot of problems. So what we came up with is I made a loom here. On the Musicom Lab switcher, one thing I wanted to note, by the way, before we get into this, one of the reasons why I chose this product, it's good, but the layout is physically the same. On the RGM MIDI controller on Barry's main rig, it has 5 presets. This one has 5 in the bottom too. That way I can lay out the programs exactly the same way. So Barry doesn't have to rethink, okay, how did Lonnie lay that out on the fly rig? I don't want that happening. Again, you want to make it nice and simple, so you can just naturally do what he does, so you put on a good show for you guys. So the layout's the same, so that was really important to me. Now, what we did here is on the Musicom Lab switcher, it has 4 control function jacks. Now, that's for turning on and off channels on amplifiers, whatever you want to turn on and off. Now, what I did here is these are TRS jacks, so you have 2 control functions per jack. I'm running that down here out to a 5-pin XLR connector on the patch box. Now I have it clearly labeled on here, whether it's the tip, the ring, the sleeve, what it's controlling on the loom. So it's nice and simple to understand. Now basically, I have a 5-pin XLR connector here in the green. On the other end, we have it set up so if we have a 2-channel rental head, you plug that one in it. Now, again, we said we were speccing out Mesa rectifiers. So if you have a 3-channel, the older version only has 2 jacks, and Barry really just needs clean dirty out of that. So the 2-jack 3-channel version, you can also use that. So it's very clearly labeled. Now, the problem was the newer 3-channel version has 3 control jacks, 1 for each channel. Again, we only need clean dirty. So I set it up so this jack controls the clean, this jack controls the dirty. So now this allows him, doesn't matter what rectifier shows up, old version, new version, 2-channel, 3-channel, he can control it to get through the show. Now, you design everything the best you can to make sure you don't have to go to your backup heads, but we have a plan because you always have to have an out. So that was very important. Now, the cool thing about the programming is, which we're going to do tomorrow, we're going to program all this stuff, basically to mimic what he's got going on in his main rig. But what we're going to do is for every patch that we program, say this is his clean channel, this is a rhythm channel, this is a lead channel, whatever. As we're doing that, we're going to program in the control function stuff to control the rental head. That way his tech will have the head there. If he has to go to it, a couple of quick repatches, this will already be connected and the programming is already there. You don't have to, there's no scrambling, there's no freaking out. He doesn't have to go to a different mode or a different bank or whatever. It's already sending the messages to control the backup head. So that's really important. Always have a way out. The other thing we did is, yesterday when I was building, Barry and I were hanging out, and he brought up a really important thing that I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't think about, actually. And so he said, well, what happens, and this stuff happens, believe me, where, say, his pedal board showed up at the show, but his rack didn't. And yes, I have experienced that before, and vice versa, and no gear showing up, and somebody else's gear showing up. I mean, things happen. So, because this is a balanced out, you can't just easily plug a guitar into it. Yeah, I can plug in somewhere over here, connect a female to female connector, whatever. That's messy, it's not quick. So what I did is I made just a simple adapter on the balanced out. So instead of going to a balanced receive box that's in the back of the rack, which say it didn't show up, I'm just converting it to unbalanced. So just plugs in a cable here into the input of his head or a rental head or whatever, you know, in the particular situation, however it goes down. So again, we have another out. So you got to think in these layers. You got the main rig, you got a backup rig. What happens if all hell breaks loose and you get to a show and your stuff, it just isn't there, or part of it's there? So we have different ways of solving different situations. So that's about it.
All right, thanks for watching. I hope that in-depth breakdown answered all your questions. I want to thank Mike Filsinger for putting this video together. Also want to thank Lonnie Totman. And I definitely want to thank you guys, the fans, for watching, and we look forward to seeing you guys out on tour.